I'm genuinely surprised by what I experienced. Hello and welcome to the Infinite Inkwell, or welcome back to the Infinite Inkwell. I'm Lewis and I'm on a journey to discover new ways of telling stories. Right now, I'm trying to do that through a video game. I've never made anything technical before, I've never written any code before I started this project. Now, in my last episode, I went away and spent some time with C++ and learned a very valuable lesson that was very much running a marathon before I can do something basic, and it kind of scared me off it. And before that, I actually looked at Godot with GDScript and actually thought it was a pretty decent engine. This time around, I'm looking at GameMaker. GameMaker made it in because I reconsidered my options after C++ didn't go too well. It's been used to make some amazing games the last few years, including Spelunky, Hotline Miami, Undertale, and Heartbound. This week, I'm going to talk to you about how I found my first 8 hours trying to learn the engine and how it works. This did not go how I expected. I'm going to start with the biggest headline for me, which was that the documentation was actually decent. And by decent, I could read it and understand it, which shocked the hell out of me after trying to learn Godot and even read some stuff on C++. The Godot documentation was not great. Really, you needed to have a lot of other complementary pieces to it, not brought to you by the engine. So for instance, I had a lot of videos that I went to through from multiple different sources, where with C++, I just had to kind of Google stuff. The documentation around Godot wasn't necessarily the best. And a lot of the sources that I sought out through different videos were good, but didn't give me quite enough of what I needed, but also showed me just how insanely complex it was. And when I tried to set it up, I just kept failing. So this time I had very, very accessible documentation. So what do I mean by accessible documentation? Well, actually, I mean this. This documentation is actually really, really clear. It tells you about the different parts of this is the kind of starting page within GameMaker. I can see everything, what it is, what they're for. I can clearly understand. You've got the wizard, it explains exactly what things are. I've got warnings. This is really useful. It goes through all of the menus, how to start a new project and things to consider. It even has me go through each of the different areas in the introduction. And these are actually really, really good. I mean, look at this one. This one explains everything within GameMaker. I mean, look at this, the detail explaining, yeah, these are the different types of assets you can have. These are the different ways that this works and how you can use it. And that's just on page 2. And something that was actually really useful is this. There are so many GIFs in here that explain exactly how things are meant to work and look. And that's really useful because if just from words, you can't tell alone. And even with stills, that makes it quite difficult unless you've got quite a lot of them. Where this actually takes GIFs, embeds them, and makes it a lot easier for you to follow what they're talking about. We also have an introduction to programming. What does it look like? This is actually something that's really important, and I will make a clear distinction with now. So, GameMaker has 2 ways of actually creating content in there. So you have GML Code and GML Visual. So this is actually a really big thing that is very different from when I was looking at Godot. You have a way of writing code, which is how you may have written code before, where it's just a simple IDE. So text IDE, you can read it all, no problem. Now, the alternative is the visual style. It allows people who need something a bit more visual or want to understand how things flow together, a new way of looking at this and not just staring at screens of code. It actually allows you to choose on a regular basis which one you'd prefer to work in. You can do this once and say this is all I want, or you can do it on a step-by-step basis and just choose as and when you want to use it. And I love this. I found it really, really helpful for me to understand, so this is how this works. These are the things that are dependent on each other. These are the events that need to happen for Y outcome. As ridiculous as that may sound, it's actually really, really important. At any point, I can actually take a peek at the code behind the visual elements so I can understand how it's been built. And if at any point I want to switch over, I can. Maybe I just want to write the code. I can do that after I've done some of the basics. Or I can just go straight into the code. It's entirely up to me as the user. And that's kind of awesome. Just to quickly jump back a bit, I want to say that everything in here was fantastic. Everything from the sprites and how you could use the inbuilt editor, so you don't need a third-party tool to build and design your own work. It all can be done natively within the platform. The objects and instances and how things visually flow is incredible. I've not seen something like this before. I think only briefly when I was looking at Blueprint in Unreal. So I'm intrigued to see what that will be later when I look at it. So this was really cool. And even for these add event pieces, it explains the events. Now, I'm actually going to put a caveat in here because this is one of the things I didn't feel it did very well. I actually went somewhere else for this. I checked out YouTube and I found this. GameMaker actually have a lot of their own content. And in here, I could go through and actually find and have everything explained to me in a very, very simple way. And it made it a lot easier to kind of get the different types of events that were in here. So something that explained the destroy event, the step event. The step event was actually a harder one to understand for me. Alarm events, which weren't in the initial introduction documentation, but kind of interesting. And I learned a lot looking at this. And same with the draw event and the mouse effect. In fact, the mouse event and the key events were super interesting and useful to understand how things start to fall together. I'll be honest, this wasn't the only time that I looked at it. The other time was actually looking at layers. So the layer stuff actually was quite complex at one point to understand, and the different types of layers. And this tutorial actually went through it really, really well. And I have to shout out to GameMaker for making some awesome stuff to go with it. They've not been entirely reliant on their documentation. They have created stuff, and in fact they've created a load of stuff and put it online for people to watch and be able to digest. If one didn't work for you, then the other one might, or a combination of the two. This really surprised me. I think mostly because Godot was approached slightly differently. I found this worked really well for me, this combination. The documentation was great and easy to read. There were a few times when I had to go outside of that. I spent a lot of time taking notes for all of it. I'm actually really happy with my notes. So this is where I've been making all my notes for this. I use Notion. I love it, been using it for years, both professionally and personally. All of the stuff that I would need to be able to build a very basic level without going too far into it. How some of the events work, so the interaction events, for instance, and how I could control a sprite or do other things. Everything that was in that documentation, I have now digested and put in my notes. I think my notes will allow me to do what I need to do next, which is actually try and build something within GameMaker. So have a fully contained couple of levels where I can have a character walk around, collect, let's say, some apples or coins, and then move on to the next location. Some very basic interaction events, some world creation, some object in the world, and moving between one space and another. This is kind of how I'm trying to understand what I can do in these engines and how easy it is to do that, and help it inform some of my evaluation when it comes to picking an engine. So what do I think of GameMaker? From the learning I've done so far, I'm genuinely impressed. Genuinely impressed. I know it's limited to just 2D games. Pretty much. I know there's some flexibility in doing some 3D stuff, but it's predominantly 2D. I don't think that matters too much right now. I'm gonna make a 2D game, and this looks really, really accessible. And it's one of the things that they shout about is its accessibility. Now, one of the things that I did learn about, which I see as a bit of a drawback, is some of the control scheme setup. So for keyboard and mouse, that seems relatively straightforward. However, it looks a lot more involved for controllers. Now, from an accessibility perspective, you want to make sure that controllers are usable, particularly with the success of the Steam Deck and other devices like the ROG Ally. You want your game to be accessible on those devices. And also, if anybody has any disabilities, you want them to be able to play your game too. So it's a bit more complex than what I found in Godot, but how does it balance out? I think I won't know really until I've built something. So that's the next video. I'm going to go away and build something in GameMaker. I'll probably even use the in-game editor for some of the tiles and sprites just to see how it is. Anyway, that's everything from me this week. If you enjoyed the video, then please give it a like. It'd be much appreciated. If you really like the video and you want to come on the journey of discovering new ways of telling stories, and in this case, game development, hit the subscribe button. It'd be great to have you on the journey with us. I am trying to keep up with the comments, so if you do have any thoughts or ideas you want to throw in, do whack them down in the comment section. I do try and reply to them because I really enjoyed chatting to you guys. Anyway, as said, that's everything. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.